You are standing in a chamber carved from shadow and silk. Candlelight flickers along velvet walls stitched with silver thread. The air is scented with rose water and decay. Every object in the room whispers wealth, lacquered cabinets, hand-painted, tiles a harp no one dares to play. But all eyes are drawn to the girl seated before the mirror. She is 20 years old. A princess, not by desire but by decree. Her name, forgotten by time, was once embroidered on the lips of every noble in the realm, not because of her mind, not because of her voice, but because of her face. That face, they said, could silence courtrooms, halt executions, bring men to their knees and other women to ruin. But behind closed doors, where only the mirror bore witness, the face began to betray her. The mirror itself was a masterpiece, an oval imported from Venice, bordered with gilded ivy leaves, polished daily by trembling servants. It did not lie, and that, perhaps, was its cruelty. Each morning it showed her a little less perfection. A fine line beside the eye, a dullness at the cheeks. Skin that once shimmered now seemed tired, human, and in her world, human meant disposable. The kingdom, like all kingdoms of its time, had no room for aging women. Beauty was currency, influence, protection. It bought silence from husbands and favor from kings. For royal daughters, it could be the difference between being sent to a palace or buried beneath it. She was not the first to panic. Physicians, healers, and apothecaries swirled around her like moths to a dying flame. They offered vials, tinctures, powders, promising radiance, purity, eternal youth. Most were harmless, some were not. Glowed like moonlight in a glass bottle, quicksilver, Mercury. It was called the alchemist's blessing. In whispered tones, it was said to purify blood, whiten the skin, and draw out the heat of aging. Cool the humors, they said. The soul calm, it worked at first. Her cheeks became luminous, her skin pale and smooth as porcelain. Nobles marveled at her divine glow. Even her mother, once indifferent, began inviting her to court banquets again. But the mirror saw everything, and over time, so did she. The first signs were subtle. Trembling fingers, bleeding gums, strange dreams filled with whispering shadows. Then came the exhaustion, the dizziness, the rage. But she was trapped in image, in duty, in fear. To stop would be to fade. To fade would be to die. And so she drank again and again. History does not remember her name. It remembers only the myth, the girl who drank moonlight to stay beautiful. A tale told in villages and old wives' kitchens. A warning wrapped in silk. But she was not a tale. She was a girl, daughter. A prisoner of her own reflection. As the candles burned low and the mirror grew colder with each breath, she leaned closer to the glass. Though her face still shimmered, her eyes had dulled. There was something behind them now. Something hollow, something already halfway dead. And yet the mirror, unblinking and forgiving, reflected her. She truly was. Not radiant, not royal, just afraid. There was no ceremony the first time. She swallowed it. Just a golden spoon. A still room, in the eyes of an old man who smelled of dried herbs and smoke. He was the royal physician, a man wrapped in fur robes and pride. He spoke in Latin as though it made the poison sacred. A sacred elixir, he whispered, distilled. From the breath of the moon, it will make you cold. And cold, he said, is beauty's closest friend. She did not hesitate. Her hand trembled. Yes, but her mind was already surrendered. The palace had taught her since birth, hesitation is for poor girls, plain girls, not for princesses, not for perfection. The mercury slid across her tongue like oil and steel. It burned nothing. It soothed nothing. It simply settled, like a secret, somewhere deep within her. The physician bowed. Servants scattered like shadows. She sat alone, waiting to feel transformed. And for a time, she did. The next morning, her skin had an impossible sheen, no longer pink with youth. but marble white, like the Virgin Mary in the cathedral's crypt. The bags beneath her eyes had vanished. Her lips no longer cracked in the cold, and oh, how the court noticed. Her father, usually drunk by dawn, smiled with a kind of pride he hadn't shown since her christening. Her mother ordered new gowns from France. Suitors reappeared like vultures over fresh meat. Even the palace painters began to sketch her without being asked. At the next banquet, she floated through candlelit halls like a ghost wrapped in emerald. Silk? Her laughter was quieter now, breathier. The ladies whispered it was enchantment. The men whispered something cruder. She smiled. Let them speak. This was the price of staying adored. But beauty like power breeds appetite. Soon one drop was not enough. The glow faded quicker. The skin dulled. Shimmer cracked. She asked for more. The apothecary brought new mixtures. Thicker, stronger. Mercury with pearl dust. Mercury with powdered bone. To keep the fire beneath the snow, he said. To keep the blood from remembering it's alive. The drops turned to sips, then spoons, then vials hidden beneath her pillow, her robes, her favorite books. Could no longer bear to be seen without it. And no one dared stop her. In the palace, servants no longer looked her in the eye. They brought her cloth soaked in rose water. They carried away bloodied towels. They powdered her face for hours to hide the bruising beneath the skin. Still, she drank because the mirror still praised her, because the court still loved her, because the moment she stopped, the world would remember she was human and humans. Do not survive in castles. She began to believe the lie that maybe this wasn't poison, maybe it was sacrifice. A holy ritual of self-in-making. Saints could suffer for eternity. Why couldn't a princess suffer for beauty? Each drop became a prayer, each symptom, a hymn, but beneath the surface. Her body began to betray her. Her joints ached in the mornings. Her lips turned gray. Her moods shifted like storms. Sometimes she wept at nothing. Sometimes she screamed. At everything, her maids whispered behind doors, but no one dared name it. No one called it what it was. Slow death, hidden in a bottle. And still, the princess stood before the mirror each morning and whispered, I am beautiful. Even as her gums bled, even as her fingers twitched, even as her soul began to rot from the inside out. He arrived, cloaked in violet silk. Wearing a ring carved from bone and a smile carved from pride, they called him Il Maestro, not doctor, not priest, not servant, just the master. A wandering alchemist who had studied in Prague and Florence and Istanbul. He claimed to have bathed in starlight, to have drunk from the Nile, to have spoken with the dead, but what he brought the princess was neither magic nor mercy. It was Mercury refined, blessed, and renamed. Aqualuna, he called it, moon water, liquid purity. Held it up to the candlelight, and it shimmered like something divine. The gods, he said, left this gift to resist decay. Even time bows before it. The court was entranced. Her mother ordered 3 bottles. Her father laughed like a fool. The servants murmured prayers when they carried it in, but only. The princess drank it willingly. She was already deep into the ritual. Her body yearned for its cold embrace. Her veins, no longer content with blood, demanded metal. Her breath, once warm and sweet, now carried the scent of rotten silver. Il Maestro encouraged it. He read her passages from old scrolls half-translated, half-invented about Persian queens and Chinese concubines who swallowed mercury to stay immortal. He quoted Paracelsus, twisting the words to fit his poison gospel. All things are poison. Only the dose makes it medicine. She believed him, because belief was easier than truth. The truth was that her hands had begun to shake, that her teeth no longer held firm, that sometimes in the mirror her pupils looked wrong, dilated, empty, but he smiled and called it transformation. Your flesh, he said, is rejecting impurity. You are becoming incorruptible, like ivory, like stone, like the moon. She smiled back, in her mind something stirred because, beneath his velvet robes, his hands were filthy, his nails were blackened, his breath stank of sulfur and deceit, and though he claimed to serve beauty, he had none himself. His eyes were cold, his skin pocked, his teeth yellow, so. Why? She wondered. Should she trust a man who had none of what he promised? Still, she drank. Still, she followed. Because the world outside offered no gentler option. Her worth was already collapsing. Her suitors were fewer, her mother's eyes colder. The court had tasted her glow and now demanded it remain, like wine. Undiluted by age, and Il Maestro knew that. He fed on it, whispered in her ear. Not as a healer, but as a priest of despair. Without this, he said, you are nothing but a girl in a gown. They will forget your name before your body grows. Cold. She drank more that night than ever before. She woke screaming, her skin burned, her head pounded, her vision blurred. When the physician arrived, she could not speak, only claw at the air, as if trying to drag her soul back into her bones. Called it a fever? Il Maestro called it a necessary shedding. It means the old self is dying, he said. You should be proud. And in the silence that followed, Princess realized something. This was never about beauty. This was about control. About a man who sold poisons to women taught to hate themselves. About a kingdom that would rather see her poisoned than imperfect. She looked into the mirror again. Her reflection shimmered, paler than ever, less glassy, lips faintly blue. And yet she whispered, I am becoming perfect. Even as the lie burned in her throat, the silk sheets had once been white. Now they were stained in shades the maids dared not name. Pale yellow from sweat, rust red from the gums. Gray where she had coughed in her sleep and bitten down on her tongue, but still. The bedchamber remained immaculate. The drapes were drawn in the morning. Rosewater misted the pillows at dusk. The candles glowed. The harp stood untouched. The illusion of control clung to every surface. Even as the girl inside unraveled, she was 20, but she moved like she was 60. Her joints stiffened before dawn. Her hands trembled when lifting a teacup. She could no longer read without double vision. At her gums, God, the gums they throbbed. Beneath her painted smile, raw and purple, pushing her teeth from their sockets one by one, and yet still she dressed for the mirror. She demanded new gowns, made of stiffer silks to conceal the trembling beneath. High collars to cover the yellowing at her throat. Gloves, always gloves, even in heat. Her beauty had become a mask, and like all masks, it needed glue, and glue for her was poison. She drank the mercury before her maids arrived, then applied her lead powder in silence. It cracked across her skin like plaster over a crumbling wall. Yet it worked, at least for a while, for long enough to sit at court, long enough to nod through a sermon, long enough to be seen. She needed to be seen, because if no one saw her, then the pain meant nothing, and the pain was endless. It gnawed at her bones, stiffened her spine. Her stomach churned against food. Her tongue often tasted of metal. She began to dream of drowning, not in water, but in mirrors. Endless mirrors, each one reflecting the face of a stranger with her eyes. The palace physicians called it melancholia, a condition of noble women. They offered herbal stews, amulets, even a leeching kit, but none dared name the mercury ill. Maestro, when summoned, merely smiled and said, "The suffering means it's working." He pressed another vial into her hand. Pain is just the flesh surrendering to perfection. And she, half mad, wholly desperate, believed him. Because what was the alternative? To age, to lose her place, to become invisible in the world that had only ever loved her face? No, she would rather rot beautifully than live honestly. But the rot was no longer metaphor. Beneath her silk gowns, her skin began to peel in patches dry, white, ghostly. Her fingernails darkened. Her breath, once sweet with cloves, smelled faintly of death. Servants whispered outside her door. One claimed to have seen a rat scurry from beneath her bed, dragging something red and soft. Another said her eyes glowed, in candlelight now, like a cat's, like a demon's. The castle itself seemed to grow quieter. No one sang in the hallways. No, one lingered near her wing. Even the bells tolled softer when she passed. And yet, every morning she sat again at her mirror. She dipped the brush in powder. She smeared the cracks. She painted life onto a corpse in slow motion, because beneath the skin, something had taken hold. Something cold, something irreversible. And still she whispered, "I am beautiful, even." As the silk began to stick to her wounds, even as her spine curved with sickness, even as her teeth fell, one by one into bloodied handkerchiefs she hid. Beneath her pillow, they brought in the painter when she could no longer walk without support. He arrived from Florence, gaunt and quiet, with paint-stained fingers and 1,000-yard stare. He had painted kings, bishops, generals, men who carved their names into history with blood. But now he was asked to do something more impossible, to paint beauty where none remained. The chamber was stripped of its shadows that morning. Curtains drawn wide, mirrors covered, candles extinguished. The painter insisted on daylight, honest light, he called it. But nothing about this room was honest. She sat on a throne-like chair, bolstered with silk pillows, gowned in pale lavender. To soften the yellows, her hands gloved, her lips painted. Her face powdered so thick it cracked when she blinked from across the room. In stillness, she might pass for a porcelain angel. Up close, she was withering. Her eyes sank deeper into their sockets. Her neck trembled beneath the weight of her hair. The rot beneath her skin had not stopped. It had simply been hidden, masked, concealed like a corpse dressed for open casket display. But the painter said nothing. He merely watched, mixed his paints, dipped his brush, and hour after hour, day after day, he painted her not as she was, but as she used to be. In the portrait, her cheeks glowed. Her eyes sparkled, her mouth curved upward, subtly, knowingly. It was the face of a woman untouched by decay, the face of a myth. And the court rejoiced. When it was unveiled, they gasped. "She looks divine," whispered one lady in waiting. "A vision," murmured a bishop. "The portrait of eternal youth," said her mother, not daring to look at her real daughter sitting silently in the shadows. The painter bowed. His commission was paid in gold, and the portrait was hung in the great hall, just beneath the ceiling fresco of the Virgin Mary, ascending into heaven. It was worshipped. Even after her absence from court events became noticeable, even after rumors spread that her voice had grown, hoarse, her steps uncertain, her memory patchy, the portrait never changed. And so the lie lived on. The princess watched this all unfold from behind a curtain. One day, she hobbled to the hall to see the painting for herself. When she looked up into the painted face, her face, she wept. Not because it wasn't her, but because it used to be. Because every brush stroke was a version of her that she had lost, and mutilated in the name of preservation. The ultimate irony. She had tried to freeze beauty, and in doing so, destroyed the very thing worth remembering now. It was the portrait that mattered, the legend, the mask, not the girl rotting in the shadows, clutching a blood-stained cloth and whispering prayers in a cracked voice to a god who seemed increasingly silent and still. The painting smiled, as her hair thinned, as her fingers stiffened, as her organs slowly, silently began to collapse under the weight of metal and time. The painter had done his job well, too well. He had not preserved her. He had replaced her, and somewhere inside, beneath powder and pain, she began to understand the horror of it all, that one day she would die forgotten in a chamber of silk, and they would remember only the portrait by winter. She no longer bled. The blood had grown thick, slow, stagnant in her veins like syrup. Her skin, once pale and soft, was now something else entirely, snow-white, not the kind that sparkles under sunlight, but the kind that collects in graveyards, cold and quiet. Crusted over tombstones, she ran her fingers along her cheek one night and watched flakes of herself fall, away dead skin, dry, brittle, like ash. She laughed once. It startled her. The sound was strange, foreign, as if another woman had been hiding in her lungs all along, waiting to break free. That was the last time she looked in the mirror. They removed all of them. After that, by her command, even the hand mirrors, even the silver plates that caught too much reflection. The sight of her own face had become unbearable, a haunted ruin of what once was. And worse, a thing that still smiled through the cracks. She remained behind curtains now, behind layers of silk and velvet, tucked into the farthest wing of the palace, where the corridors grew colder and the windows frosted from the wind. It was safer there, quieter, no court visits, no suitors, no sermons from her mother. Even the alchemist had stopped coming, leaving only the vials and instructions and hushed voices from servants who crossed themselves when they entered. She stopped asking questions, instead. She wrote letters to saints, to angels, to the Virgin Mother. They were scrawled in trembling script, blotted with ink, and sometimes with tears. Her prayers were not for beauty anymore, not for youth, only for mercy. But mercy does not visit girls who poison themselves in the name of being seen, she began. To hallucinate, shadows moved where they shouldn't. Voices murmured in corners long after the candles died. She felt things crawling beneath her skin, tiny silver insects, tickling her spine, nibbling her thoughts. They told her she was almost free. They whispered that perfection had a price, and she had nearly paid it in full. The maid said she talked in her sleep, that she muttered to the walls, that she'd begun humming lullabies no one had taught her. Her eyes turned glassy to pale moons set in a marble face. Her skin, now thinner than parchment, bruised if she turned too quickly. Her fingertips cracked open if exposed to air too long. Even the softest brush of cotton left one of us. So she lay in stillness, silent, like a relic, a once holy object now too fragile to touch. She had become legend while still alive. Some in the palace began calling her the Snow Maiden. Others said she'd died already, and the thing in her room was just a painted corpse with a voice. One boy claimed to have seen her shadow pass by the chapel walking backwards, barefoot in the frost, but no one dared investigate because beauty, once corrupted, terrifies the living, and so she remained in her silken tomb. She no longer wept, no longer dreamed. Her thoughts drifted like smoke. In a closed room, some days she forgot her name, but the mirror in her memory still stared back. It showed a girl who was once worshipped, once adored, once radiant. A girl who chose poison because no one told her she was enough without it. And now, that her skin had turned to snow, untouched, unspoiled, cold, and vanishing by the hour. The bells rang through the courtyard, bright and cruel. It was meant to be a day of celebration, the union of two kingdoms. A royal wedding whispered about 4 years. Guest arrived in carriages trimmed with gold. Trumpets sounded, doves released, perfumed petals scattered across stone. But the bride could barely stand. They dressed her like a doll. Layers of ivory silk stitched over bone-thin limbs. A bodice pulled tight enough to cage her lungs. Veil drawn low to hide the bruises along her jaw, the yellowing of her lips. She did not speak. She did not cry. She obeyed, because that, too, had been promised of her long before she could walk, long before the poison, long before her name became a whispered warning. A royal daughter must marry. A royal daughter must unite bloodlines. A royal daughter must serve, and serve she did. They carried her down the steps when her knees gave out. They dabbed rose water beneath her wrists to mask the sour rot that now clung to her skin. They pinned her mouth in place with rouge and powder until it mimicked a smile. But it was not a smile. It was a wound stitched shut. The prince, her groom, waited at the altar. He did not look at her, not directly, not for long. Just a flicker of discomfort in his jaw, a twitch at the corner of his eye. But the deal had been signed. The alliance was sealed. The bride had arrived, and that, to them, was enough. The chapel was a masterpiece. Frescoes of saints stared down from the ceiling, their hands raised in silent protest. Candles lined the aisles like watchmen, and behind the altar, Christ wept silently on the cross. She could barely hear the vows. The blood pulsed in her ears like a funeral drum. Her vision blurred, her spine bent with effort. The priest's voice stretched into something grotesque, elongated. Syllables, ceremonial nonsense, all floating above the ache in her marrow. And when asked if she would take this man, she opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her lips moved, but her throat refused. It was dry, splintered, hollow for a moment. Silence flooded the chapel like a rising tide. Then she nodded, and the room exhaled. Applause, cheers, laughter. From nobles too rich to recognize suffering, her mother dabbed tears with lace. The prince leaned in to kiss her, and her body jolted ever so slightly, as if recoiling from contact, from warmth, from life. Later at the banquet, she collapsed. Just as the musicians began to play, her head lolled forward. Her goblet spilled. Her hand slid from the armrest like a broken Marno net. At first they thought it was fatigue, then perhaps fainting. But when the physician checked her pulse, his hand lingered longer than it should have. The prince rose. Ah! Room fell into murmurs. She was carried away before dessert. The guests were told she needed rest. The excitement had been too much. That she would return in the morning, but she never returned. That night, in the bridal chamber soaked in lavender and wine, she vomited black. Her skin turned cold, and her eyes stopped blinking. The wedding had taken place. The treaty had been signed. The kingdom rejoiced. And somewhere in the upper halls of the palace, behind locked doors and closed curtains, the princess who had given everything for beauty was dying. Alone, in silence, still dressed in white, they locked the door behind her. No servants, no visitors, no candles left burning past dusk. The physician was told to return in the morning if she lasted that long. What remained now was the body, the temple, the prison. The echo of a girl who had once danced in gardens and traced stars into her journal, and the Mercury was winning. She could not scream. The vocal cords had stiffened, a side effect of the metal's grip. Muscles twitched against her will, jerking like she was being pulled by invisible strings. Her vision swam in and out of clarity. Walls melted. Shadows moved. Time lost meaning. Only the pain remained. It began in the stomach, a boiling pit of acid and ice. Then, to the bones aching, splintering, grinding against each other like wet stones, her skin peeled from the inside. Her tongue swelled. Her body became a cage, locking the soul inside, and the soul began to rot. At first she believed she was being punished for vanity, for silence, for obedience. Then she began to pray, but no God answered. Not the saints, whose relics lined her childhood bedchamber. Not the Madonna she used to draw in charcoal. Not even death, who watched her now, amused, patient, unhurried. Mercury was not swift. It was patient. It laced itself into the brain, first memory, then emotion. She saw her father's face and forgot his voice. She heard a child's lullaby, but could no longer remember the words. She forgot the names of flowers, the seasons, her own. She whispered once, "Who am I?" Only the rats heard her. By midnight, her body began to convulse. Cold sweat pooled in the hollows of her back. Her hands clenched into claws. Her spine arched until it cracked. Her breath was shallow and loud, the sound of drowning in air. The nursemaid came once, weeping. She left before the hour turned. There was nothing anyone could do. The royal physician had warned them weeks ago. Chronic cinnabar ingestion, he had said. No remedy, no hope. And so the walls were sealed, the bed linen soaked through, and the princess, once the jewel of the court, curled like a dying animal at the center of her wedding chamber. But somewhere, beneath the agony, beneath the fever and the blood, something deeper moved, a thought, a clarity, a truth, that this wasn't just Mercury. It was memory, a lineage of women told they must suffer to be wanted. It was history, centuries of poison bottled and sold in porcelain jars. It was beauty, weaponized. It was obedience, refined. It was silence, consumed. And in her final moments, the princess did not think of her husband. She thought of the girl she used to be, the girl who read poetry in the orchard, who painted stars on her ceiling, who asked why queens never had scars, the girl who hadn't yet swallowed the world's demands. And for one flickering instant, as her body arched and her mouth opened wide in a final silent scream, she saw That girl, and the girl smiled back. Then nothing, only breath. Then stillness. Then cold, the agony had passed, and in its place, emptiness. The palace fell quiet for 3 days. No bells rang. No flags lowered. No priest dared speak her name. Behind the thick stone walls, a silken shroud was pulled over a face no one dared to remember. The official story said she died of a sudden illness, a fever, perhaps her nerves. Women were always dying of nerves, but the truth was sealed in glass. The coffin was ordered in haste, imported crystal, carved with angels who wept from hollow eyes. They laid her body inside, dressed in the same gown she wore on her coronation day. White silk, pearls, gloves, to hide the blackened fingertips. No one mentioned the smell. No. One spoke of the ulcers on her tongue, the hair falling in clumps from her scalp, or the bruises blooming along her spine. Those belonged to another girl. Now, a forgotten girl. A girl who had asked for beauty and died for it. The coffin was placed in the chapel. Candles lined the aisle. Velvet ropes kept mourners back. Only nobles were allowed to view the body, but even they kept their distance. Behind her frozen eyelids, a kind of warning lingered. Something ancient, something ancestral. The echo of a scream turned inward. Some said she looked at peace. They lied. For those who dared look closer, her skin told a different tale. Pale, not porcelain, waxy, not luminous. A shimmer across her cheekbones. The telltale gleam of Mercury, as if even in death,